Good afternoon. Hi, Meg.
Hi, Eve. Good to be here.
Good. Thank you for joining me. My name is Eve Berry, and I'm here with Meg Tripoli and another one of our podcasts about community building. So could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, Meg, before we get started?
Yeah, I've been involved with community building for about 30 years now. Mostly I've done workshops, but I've also done a lot of work to integrate what I've learned in the workshops into my life and into my business career.
Great, great. So how did you first learn about community building? It's always an interesting story to see how people have come to learn about it originally.
Yeah, it actually, my answer is it was serendipity, and I love that word. I had just moved to Chicago in the early 90s, and I was looking for ways to connect with people and meet people. And I saw an ad in the Onion paper, the Onion newspaper in Chicago, for a community building workshop. And it mentioned community building and mentioned Scott Peck's name. And I had read The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, liked the book. I didn't know anything about the community building because I had not yet read The Different Drum. But I thought, what the heck, I'll give it a whirl. So I signed up for the community building workshop, and it was one evening and 2 days, I believe. We went through a lot of process. We did the community building, and we didn't reach community. But it was a very interesting experience. It was a group process. I learned about group process during the thing. But if I had taken that workshop only to decide whether I was going to do another workshop, I probably never would have done one again. But the leader of the group, or actually the person who formed it, who hosted it is the correct word, I guess, called me up a couple weeks later and said, some of us are getting together for pizza. Do you want to come join us? And I thought, oh, good, that's nice. I can see some of the people. So we went, we had pizza. And then as we were leaving, it was a nice summer night in Chicago, and everybody said, well, let's go have a little chat and sit in the park. We went and we sat in the park at probably about 8 o'clock at night, and we were still there at 7:30 the next morning. And we sat in the park and built community, and I've been with it for 30 years since then.
Amazing. So you talked about and we didn't reach community. So say a little bit more about what that means.
Well, the term reached community, for people who have been in the workshops and have experienced the process or even read about the process, because I know Peck talks about it in The Different Drum, it's kind of an elusive experience, but when you get there, you know you're there. And the best way I can describe it is it's like falling in love en masse. It's like you feel connected to everybody in the group. You know, you could work out any situation that may come up, any disagreement that may come up with anybody in the group while you're actually in community. And that's the best way I can describe it.
That's helpful. Yeah. Sounds pretty amazing.
It is. It truly is.
And in that, if it didn't happen in the workshop, it sounds like it did happen in that chat in the park.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So, so you've been involved for a long time, and you said 30 years. And how have you been involved in community building during that time?
Well, mainly in the first, I guess, 18 years, I just attended workshops, and I probably averaged one every year or every year and a half or something like that. Then I moved to Florida, and there was nothing offered down here. There was nobody doing the work, and I didn't have it within me to start it up myself. So I kind of let it go. And COVID came along, and the Chicago group started doing an online community building workshop, a weekend workshop, and I attended those. I believe I've attended 3 of them since COVID began. And as a result of attending it online, I got together with a group of people who had attended a few of them also, and we have been doing an online community building with about 14 of us now for the last year. So that's pretty much my involvement with the SC sponsored community building work.
Mm-hmm. And what was it about your experience that has kept you staying involved with it?
Well, I have to say, I believe the process has really been one of the greater influences in my whole life. It really expands me. Participating in the workshops seems to make me more authentic and have deeper connections. And time I do one, I grow a little bit more. And I have a quick story to tell you too about that idea of authenticity and deeper connections, because I think it's not just me that's experiencing the authenticity and the deeper connections. I think other people notice it too. Because one time after I had a pretty profound experience in the community building, I was living in Chicago at the time, and I was on a bus on my way home, and I just happened to be standing in the bus, and somebody was standing next to me, and they just started telling me stories about their life. And they went on, and they were deep, personal, intimate stories about issues they'd had in their lives, pains of their life and everything. And it felt comfortable and easy. And as I was watching the guy talk to me, I could see his face soften as he was telling me stories. And we got to his bus stop, and he turned to me and he said, "I can't believe I talked to you like this. Oh my." And then he ran off the bus, which was kind of interesting because in the space that I was in, it was normal. It was what I expected. It's how I expected to interact with people, but it was new to him. And he was really surprised at the experience that he had.
Well, that makes me think about the possibility of being in that community building space, if you will.
Yeah.
It's almost like a state, perhaps a state of consciousness, or perhaps a field, like you're in some kind of a field that maybe other people pick up on, is what that sounds like.
It's definitely a different energy.
Yeah, I've experienced the same thing. Funny you mentioned that. So it happened to me one time with a cab driver. It was, it was like, oh, okay. He was telling me his life story. So I hadn't thought about that in a while. So very interesting. So what you had said that it's been a profound influence on your life. And just getting a little more specific about that, what do you see as the benefits?
Well,
how has it had a positive impact on your life, other than, we talked about being authentic and deep connections? And
well, I think that is pretty much the basis of it. The one thing I notice is people, when they first come to community building, they seem to come all with the intention of reaching this elusive state of community. But it's almost like they're there for a high. And the state of community actually is connection and belonging, I guess, is probably the best way I can describe it. And the community building process is really, the circle work is what I'm specifically talking about, seems for me to be more about the process of learning how to be in the state. And my ultimate goal is to live in the state. I mean, I don't know that I'll ever reach that, but I would like to try. If someone gave me a choice, like you can either have the high of the community building experience that you get in the circle, or you can know what it is to live in community and to be in community, to personally be in community, I think I'd pick that over the high. I think the high is the benefit. I think the learning is what is the benefit. It's almost like people go and they're looking to get hooked on something, and what they end up with is they end up learning that they can actually improve their overall life as a result of what they learn in the community building. It's not the peak experience that's the most important, in my opinion. It's what you take with you and how it changes your life.
Well, what you're saying is really interesting to me, because what it reminds me of is the difference between those weekend workshops and the ongoing community groups.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Is that when it happens, and it often does, not always, but when it does happen in the weekend workshop, the 3-day event, the 2-day event, the high, you talk, the peak experience,
Mm-hmm.
It's a little more subtle in the ongoing group.
Yes.
And so, which actually is more akin to what life looks like.
Correct.
With people you see every day and you relate to, as opposed to strangers you've never met.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting parallel to me. So I think I would take the latter as well.
And you know what surprises me a bit is when people have attended a community building workshop, the weekend circle or whatever, and they do reach this state of community, and then they never see the people again. Like, I've always had the tendency to want to continue something after the workshop, you know. And to my advantage, when the first 18 years is I was living in Chicago and attending them in Chicago. I wasn't, you know, flying from another state or whatever. So I always made some sort of an attempt to keep up with the people in the group. But that's not necessary, because, you know, when you experience it, you take a little bit of it with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the things you mentioned was that you've certainly been taking this into your life, and you also mentioned taking it into your work.
Yes.
And so I know you've done some work in the company that you lead. Tell us a little bit about the company you're a part of, and just to set the stage for the conversation about how you brought community building into it.
Okay, sounds good. I co-manage a small family-owned business, and there's 44 employees, and we're in 4 different locations. And when I say I co-manage it, I'm responsible for the accounting and the administrative work, and my counterpart, Joe, is responsible for the sales and the operation. And we were asked to manage the company. We were both internal employees. We were already employees of the company when the owner made a change in management and asked 2 of us to manage the company. And we decided ourselves that we wanted to co-manage. We didn't want to have one person responsible and the other person reporting to them or anything like that. And the reason why we thought that we could do that, even though people said, you can never do that, somebody's got to be in charge, but we thought we could do it because we each had our own area of expertise. They didn't really overlap much. And we shared the belief that we wanted the company to be a customer and employee focused company. And it's come along really very well and worked well. And I think in essence, in a lot of ways, Joe and I work in community with each other.
So it sounds a little bit about a little bit like co-facilitating community
in a
building.
Workshop. Maybe, yeah, I guess it would be. Yeah.
That model, I've not seen that in leadership very often at all. A couple times, but not very often. So
yeah.
And what interested you in? You mentioned making it customer oriented and employee oriented, and so what interested you in bringing community building practices or principles into the workplace?
Well, when we took the company on, there was no trust within the company. Anytime anything went wrong, there was a witch hunt to find out who made the mistake, who messed it up. Nobody was protected. Nobody was safe from anything. It was every man and woman for themselves, and it just didn't work. And we really needed what there's a phrase from the FCE mission statement that says we needed to discover new and better ways of being together. And that is the very first thing that we knew we had to do. And so we set out, not necessarily in the fashion of the community building workshop by any chance, but we set about to bring what we believe to be community into our own organization.
And how did you go about doing that?
Well,
with managers, employees?
Yeah, first of all, it was pretty easy to just make the decision to do it because we had a lot of leeway. I have to say we were very, very lucky to have an owner who put a lot of trust in us and just expected us to report out once a quarter on how the company was doing. And so we didn't have to go sell the idea to anybody. We just could talk about what we thought we needed to do and put it into place ourselves. But we never called it community building. We never sat in a circle. It's like everything in the mission statement kind of speaks to what we wanted. You know, we wanted to communicate with authenticity. We wanted to relate with love. I'm reading right from the mission statement. We wanted to deal with difficult issues. We wanted to seek and affirm diversity, and we wanted to bridge differences with integrity. And how we set off to do that is we started by traveling to each of the branches, Joe and I together, and having small meetings with the employees. We couldn't get everybody together all together because people had to be working. So we broke it down into smaller groups, and we talked about what does it mean to be a customer and an employee-centered organization? But we didn't talk about it. We asked them to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And we got a big whiteboard or a flip chart, and we wrote down everything that they said as we were going. And I was just amazed at the participation. People that I would have never, ever expected to say anything were giving us thoughts and ideas, and we're getting enthusiastic about it. So I think that was a really important step for us to do. And from that, and not necessarily just from that, but next step, I guess maybe would be the best thing, is we set out to establish some values for the company. So we determined that our values were going to be truth and humanity, personal development, performance, and collective entrepreneurship, which I can tell you about that in a minute, and fun. And later, after that, we added on the assumption of positive intent. We also introduced a couple of approaches that are out there. They're books, Managerial Moment of Truth and Radical Candor. And there are two approaches of management and working with people that are really, really closely aligned to what I think is the FCE mission statement. Things were moving along. You know, we tried to use our values and the concepts that I talked about in everything that we did, in every decision we made, every conversation we had with employees. We tried to talk about expectations and meeting expectations more than giving people like a review once a year or whatever. But the one thing is that it got a little bit better, but people were still stuck in the blame culture. And so we were about 2 years into it, and we decided to have a manager retreat where we all spent the weekend at a cabin. And you know that because I called you up and I said, Eve, please come facilitate. So it was the best thing that we could have done. And the reason why I think it was the best thing is because Joe and I became part of the group. We were no longer the people trying to make things happen or trying to get people to share or do something. We were in the group with everybody sharing. And I think a couple of the things that I remember most from that retreat was when you, and you could probably tell me the wording better than I could tell you, but when you said something about share something about yourself that people wouldn't know by looking at you, or people don't already know about you, or something like that. And when you did that, I was sitting there going, oh my, this is going to fall like a lead balloon. And I was amazed. I was totally and completely amazed at the things that people were sharing and the connections that people started to feel as a result of that. And then we went on with some other learnings that you brought to us about conflicts, and we went through gave everybody chances to bring up what they thought issues of the company were, and we went from there. So
yes, and that and that question you talked about, that tell us something about yourself that nobody can tell just by looking, was at the very beginning.
Yes,
absolutely. If I recall, in that sharing section, I didn't know what to expect either, but people were crying.
Yeah. Yes.
And it was like I was going, whoa, strap in here. So yeah, and it went from there. It went deeper from there, and yet
it definitely did over the weekend. Yeah,
we never, even though
it's a little crazy, because we had some challenges that in a crazy way brought us together. Like we got there and we had just bought, I think it was like $600 worth of food or something like that. We got there and the refrigerator wasn't working, and so we had to get coolers and ice and this and that, and just the task of us being together as a group was very good for the weekend, for bringing us together.
Well, one of the things that we always say when we're doing a community building workshop, and there's certainly circle time when people are doing the process, but we always say to people, where you're always building community at dinner and lunch and after the session, it looks different. And so that's what that made me think of, is all those times spent with trying to save the food and deal with the weather and the armadillos running around in the yard. And it was quite a wild ride. So, and it was the middle.
The wine helped too, though.
Well,
I said the wine helped.
Yeah, the wine and beer didn't hurt. Yeah, so never does. So, yeah, and it was really pretty extraordinary. Although we never per se sat in a circle and did quote unquote community building, it was very clear that the sense of community got created, and it sounds like you've been able to have that be the foundation and then build from there.
Yeah.
And having changed, it sounds like you really changed it from a toxic culture to a nurturing culture.
Well, I would hope so. I would, I guess the overall impact of it, I think, has been more participation on the part of people. If they feel like they can bring something up, people feel like they can call Joe and I directly, and they don't have to go through anybody. If there's something like, I'm having a problem, we have helped people out in various situations. We've had people that had a lot of issues during COVID. We had mothers that had children at home that they had to educate. And we had people caring for people that were sick, and we all came together as best we could. And but at the same, I guess I would say overall, we've had more participation and kind of put a kibosh on the whole blame game. Okay, some people that have been there the longest still have like a little bit of a pullback when something isn't working right, because they're so used to it. But hopefully we made like 80% headway into that one. But I do have to say that COVID, I think, has slowed us down a lot with the effort we're trying to make, because we had that workshop 8 months before COVID hit. So we didn't even have a whole year after that and before COVID hit. And the focus has so shifted in our business, at least, especially for me, honestly, in the role that I play, because there were all kinds of things you had to do to establish policies and procedures. You had to take care of your employees, make sure they were safe, make sure people are taking temperatures, make sure they're sanitizing things. You know, are we letting people into the office? Are we not letting people into the office? What's our mask policy? You know, what are the government programs that we can use to help us sustain ourselves during this COVID? And taking care of all of that stuff is really taking a lot of the focus off of trying to work together as a group. And then on top of that, we've had the great resignation where everybody's quitting and going to other jobs. And, you know, there's all kinds of explanations of why that's happening and how that's happening. And honestly, at this point, it doesn't matter. It is happening, and we're spending an inordinate amount of time hiring people. And therefore, that takes, again, away from efforts that we can build community. And we've lost connection too, because, you know, we during the height of COVID, we weren't even in the same room together. We made every effort to have one person in a room at a time. And, you know, that really takes away from the connection with your fellow employees. And hopefully with things lessening a little, we can get a little bit of that back. Who knows what's going to happen though. So, but I'm happy to say that I think the blame game is pretty much gone.
Yeah. Well, as you're talking about the climate that's been created, I think about the guideline in community building that we use, which is to voice displeasure to the group. And you think, oh, okay, that which allows people, gives people the freedom and the permission to be able to bring issues up. And it sounds like you probably never said to them voice displeasure, but it sounds like that's what's happened, is that people have felt able to do that.
I mean, honestly, it doesn't happen with everybody. Everybody doesn't get it. I mean, I don't honestly think we're actually to a tipping point yet. The idea that, you know, the idea with tipping point is enough people have made the change so that it kind of flows over the whole group. We're not to a tipping point yet, but we keep working at it. We'll get there.
Well, and you're talking about how many year history before you introduced a new way of being together?
Well, the company's been around for 74 years.
Yeah, so you got a lot of history there. You've got to turn the Queen Mary around with an oar, you know. So.
Yeah, I've only been with the company for 9 years, so I honestly don't know how it got to where it got to, or how long it had been like that, but it definitely wasn't a pleasant place to work.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're making headway though, and that you can see it's moving in the right direction. You're moving the needle. So perhaps you've already addressed this, but I'm going to raise it with a little bit different question, is how do you see community building in organizations as being different from the actual community building circle?
Well, I guess the best way to explain the difference is, in a business, it's task. Our focus is on task. And in community building, our focus is on process. And, you know, if I keep going back to the FCE mission statement. I don't mean to keep repeating things, but it, you know, the mission statement starts out with FCE encourages people in a fragmented world to discover new and better ways of being together, living, learning, and teaching the principles of community. FCE serves as a catalyst for individuals, groups, and organizations to, once again, communicate with authenticity, relate with love and respect, etc., of the things that I had already said. And like, who wouldn't want to work in an organization that could actually do that? I think anybody would, and I would love any and all organizations to adapt that mission statement as part of how they work. But at the same time, organizations exist for a purpose. Our company exists to provide industrial supplies to our customers when they need them for a fair price on time, and to provide a living for the employees and a profit for the owners, because the owners have invested their capital into the business. So those are very task-oriented purposes. So it's more like the process of community building is brought by people within the organization to overlay the purpose of the organization. It's kind of like, maybe a better way to say it is that once you have enough people skilled at the process of community building, it just plain helps you do a better job at what you do in your business, whether
With the task, yep.
Service, or whether you're providing product, or even a community organization or something like that. So,
Mm-hmm. Well, I know Scotty would always say community first, task second, in the sense that if you figure out the process, just define it as how people work together. The ways people work together is the process. That's the how. Then the what gets easier. The task gets easier.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense as far as making the tasks easier. But at the same time, if you've got a customer that didn't get their shipment, and you've got somebody who, an employee who has somebody sick at home and isn't there, and all of that, you can't sit around and do community building. You have to get done what you have to get done. And hopefully the experience of how people interact with each other within your organization is strong enough to get you through all those times.
Well, and really you're talking about a culture which doesn't often happen, by the way. And I'm an organizational consultant by profession, so I see a lot of organizations. People always have the values that they put out as beliefs, but then it's very hard for people to actually walk the talk.
Yeah.
And so I am seeing in your company, and what you're talking about is that you've maybe not completely closed the gap, but you've worked very hard to have to walk the talk, and to have people trust in that.
Yes.
And perhaps maybe it's not past the tipping point where everybody's on board, but it's made significant progress.
And honestly, especially now that we replaced so many employees, because so many people have left during this great resignation. So I feel like we need to reintroduce the concepts all over again.
Yep. Well, and the other thing you mentioned that it made me think of is that you were talking about the customer calls up and they didn't get a shipment, but if the employees are acting out of a sense of connection and community, they're going to treat those customers with dignity and respect and kindness, as opposed to annoyance, which is only going to help the company. So, which is that customer focus you talked about. Have you seen an impact financially, or has there been I know there are a lot of factors that probably haven't.
Yeah, there are
a
lot of factors. I mean, in essence, we restructured the whole organization. There had been developed a layer of middle management, and we're 44 company employees. So it really was kind of crazy, this level of middle management. So, unfortunately, there were some good people that were taken out. I mean, we couldn't keep everybody and be profitable. That was one of the reasons why we were brought in, was to turn the company around financially. And so we did take out a layer of middle management, and we did, to use the phrase from the book Good to Great, we got the right people on the bus. And required us to take some people off the bus in order to get the right people on the bus. So, all of those were hard decisions to make, because there are things that were impacting people's lives, but we knew that if we didn't, we weren't going to make the progress that we needed to. to sustain the business. I mean, we needed to sustain the business so that we could support 44 families.
Mhm.
And, you know, if you can't do that, then you throw everybody into turmoil.
Mhm. So it sounds like you confronted the brutal facts and
Yeah.
took action.
To use another phrase from Good to Great.
So, well,
Yeah.
just as we're starting to wrap this up, when do you think a leader should consider introducing these principles and approaches into a workplace?
Wow. You know, I actually was thinking about that question, and I don't know that I have a good answer to it. And my experience, I've been working with small business because I worked with large organizations when I first got out of school, and I didn't belong. I didn't fit in. There was no possibility in my mind for these large organizations that I belonged to have any sense of connection, and for me to know where I belonged within it and what role I played in it. So I switched. I worked for the University of Michigan, and then I worked for Sheridan Corporation. And from after those two experiences with the large organizations, I've only worked for small business.
Mhm.
So I don't really know how a large organization could actually decide to do this. I think pockets, yes, I think people could within their own little group develop pockets, but I'm not sure. I mean, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it just seems very, very, very difficult to me. And when it comes to a small organization, I really think it has to be the people in charge that bring it forward. It's in a small organization, so much of who the leader is impacts the organization. And if the leader themselves wants to experience authentic connections to people and have a work environment where people feel like they're treated with respect and love, and where diversity is accepted and honored, and people communicate authentically, it can happen. I don't know that it can happen from the ground up. It feels to me like it has to be from the top down.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if I think about situations where it's been successful, that's usually how it's been introduced.
Mhm.
Is a leader somehow goes to a community building or experiences that and wants to do that. And I think is true with you and Joe, willingness to look in the mirror and self-examine and grow yourself. So
Yeah.
so I
Have
think
you
I
ever
don't think
have
you can
you
do
had
it if you're not willing to grow and learn.
have you had the experience of seeing it put into place in a large organization?
Yes, that's another conversation.
Mhm.
We've had some experience with that. I will say that it's hard. While it's possible to do, it's hard to sustain.
Mhm. I could imagine.
So I've seen it work very successfully, and kind of almost like a bell curve where you have a peak and then it subsides. And the most dramatic example is that we worked with a manufacturing plant, introduced it. The plant manager was very involved, introduced it, did community building, infused it into the organization. They became a top performing plant. They got all these awards and everything else, and then they were sold.
Okay.
But they were sold, but the group, because they were laying off staff and they had to let people go. They, as part of it, they did what they called downsizing with dignity. So they decided who would go first, and the people who needed to be employed the longest ended up staying the longest. So it was a pretty remarkable
Well,
shut down, but it was,
better
that was out of their
decisions.
control.
Yeah, you just make better decisions when you're experiencing a sense of community.
Yep. So thank you. This was fascinating, and it's always good to speak with you about this and hear about your company and how it's moving. And although I'm sure you have mixed feelings about it, the fact that you've got some new energy and employees, maybe that's a new wave of opportunity to
Yeah, I'm going
go
to start
another
looking at it
cycle.
like that. Thank you, Eve.
Well, thank you so much,
been
and
a
appreciate
good
your
time.
insights and good work. Keep up the good work. So,
All right. Thank you.
okay.
You
Bye.
take care. Bye-bye.
So-